everyone. Thank you for joining this episode. This is going to be the fourth episode of the 30 Days of Activism that the Elite Climate Action is championing, an initiative to spotlight women-led organizations, individuals that are trying to build a sustainable world for everyone, and seeing the role that women and girls play towards championing a sustainable development goals, because we need that equitable solutions is solving this defining issue of our time. And today I have Esther Muiru, that is the advisor to International Land Coalition on Women and Girls' right to land. And so she's going to be telling us about issues that are related to land, women's rights to land, and how that can be used to fix the climate change crisis, how to tackle other defining issue of our time. Because over time, land has served as a carbon sink for us to be able to deal with the impact of the climate change crisis. And it is very important that the land degradation is affecting our ability to tackle the climate change crisis. As land have a great role to do to see that we are able to get climate justice, achieve gender equality, strengthen girls' education, food security, and poverty, and even affecting sustainable development goals as a whole. So today we'll discuss more of these aspects about land, women's rights, and the rest. And just briefly, Esther Muiru is going to introduce herself to us for us to get to know more about her and what she does and her role in the International Land Coalition. So thank you so much for coming. We really honor with your presence today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am privileged to participate in this wonderful discussion that is timely. I'm humbled to have the opportunity to just share our thoughts as International Land Coalition, but also from my own experience, because I have had experience running for over 25 years, working on women's empowerment, women human rights, but it's located in supporting rural grassroots women, indigenous women, to be at the center of the solutions that resonate with their lives, that also contribute to achieving sustainable development. So that's really my passion, and that's my inspiration to do this. So currently I work at the International Land Coalition as heading the Women's Land Rights portfolio. And I know you've just talked about you are spotlighting women's organization. I would say that International Women's Land Rights is really a feminist organization. It's not a women's organization. Some believe in feminism approaches to work. But International Land Coalition is very grounded and have a wealth of knowledge on land governance. And when I joined the International Land Coalition as a staff last year, majority of my colleagues in the women's human rights asked me, so what would you be doing with and not in a women's organization? That's because that's who I am. But for me, it's been telling since I started working on this in this organization. The International Land Coalition works in over 30 countries. It is working with over 300 organizations that come from local to national to regional to global, big organization, with all the agenda of making land governance being people-centered. And so with this wealth of information, what the International Land Coalition is trying to use this experience and expertise and privilege to ensure that it's advancing women's land rights. But more important, to ensure that it's linking with women's human rights organization, that when we talk about violence against women, we do not really look at the violence that is perpetrated towards women that is related to insecurity of their land rights. We are not looking at the issues that relate to insecurity of women's land rights and how communities are being affected by the climate crisis. And that's why, for me, this theme is very, very important. So what does the International Women's Land Coalitions think about women's land rights? So I would say that we have a new strategic plan, 2022-2030. And the first priority is shifting power and making sure that the power is centered in the hearts of the people that require it. And the first on the front line of the articulation how we require these women are the women's group that work and are members of the International Women's Land Rights. So what we do in the International Land Coalition is to build the capacity of grassroots women, indigenous women, and local women, women living in the rural areas, to be able to interface with other governance organizations so that they can prioritize their issues. We are making sure they understand about the institutional frameworks, the legal frameworks, the policy frameworks that are existing in their countries, and they are able to surface where the gaps, because the gaps is not necessarily the lack of all these institutional or legal framework. The gaps is about the practice and the implementation of them. And so this is what the International Land Coalition does in relation to secure women's land rights.
Thank you so much. You've talked a lot about what International Land Coalition are doing to see that they secure women's land rights. And I think I've been following their work for quite a number of time, and I saw what they are doing in the indigenous community worldwide. And I think we have different organizations that either they are women-led or men-led, that are trying to champion women issues, right? Trying to see how they can bring equitable solution. I think that is what matters most, that either it is women-led or men-led organization, or what matters most is that let it be an equitable solution, let it be a way that it could demand for justice, for our equal rights. And so just to ask my question, you've talked a lot about what your organization is doing. And I want to ask, what is that missing link when it comes to women's land rights? What did you think we need to do that we are not doing? And what should we do? Thank you.
So first and foremost, what is the missing link is that people are speaking and deciding on solutions that need to be implemented without bringing the indigenous people, without bringing the local women, the rural women onto the table. And that people think that they know the solutions that will give sustainable development that will be inclusive to these local communities. They don't. And that is where we start from. So and that is why when International Land Coalition speaks to shifting power, is also shifting power on whose voice is getting heard. So that when the voice is heard and it's integrated in the programs, in the implementation actions, then it's the voice of the rural, indigenous, local women that is part of it. That is one big missing gap. The second thing, the missing gap, is that we seem not to be understanding the relationship between insecurity of women's land rights, the inequality, the deepening inequality that is happening across social classes, along gender biases, across ethnic groups. And then also, we don't seem to be understanding the deep-rooted nexus between secure women's land rights and the kind of climate crisis and escalating natural disasters that we are seeing. So one of the things is that we need to make that link very efficient and very collectively. And I don't think that there is anyone all over the world that understands how this nexus is so important, and on day-to-day that they deal with it, apart from a rural grassroots woman who is living in poverty, who cannot access adequate land to grow enough food for her family, a woman who is being pushed out in order to allow extractive industries to thrive, a woman who cannot make decision on what kind of crops will be planted in her land today and next year, because somebody else must make that decision. A woman who cannot even make a decision on what gets out of that land and where those profits will go. She may not even access that profit. So that kind of insecurity of land is very, 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 very deep in the lives of these women. You know, the International Land Coalition is very, very, very invested in supporting land defenders. We have realized that the most ignored and the most impacted highly are the women that are fighting for land, the women land right defenders. But more important, the ones that are actually not just fighting for land as land defenders so that they can make economic gain out of it, but the ones that they know if we do not secure land, we are actually not going to secure it and deal with the climate crisis and be able to have the natural resources maintained and the ecosystem in a way that it will save us as an existing generation and as future generation. That the natural resources we have, including land, it's not expandable. The women understand that. They know, yes, we need to increase our economic capacity, but we know that's not the only reason that we need to secure land. We need to make sure that this land can sustainably be dealt with, be exploited in the way that generation to come can also use it. And I would say also that the third missing gap is we are so much over investing in writing policies, in writing legal framework, in building institutional frameworks where we are positioning roles and responsibility and employing people, and are not actually investing on what needs to be done to implement this. And that's why today the International Land Coalition is a steering member of the Stand for Halal campaign. The Stand for Halal campaign is a global campaign to ensure now we are not only focusing on and investing in writing new policies, reviewing policies, but making sure that we are changing norms, that the policies that exist are getting implemented and implemented properly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Like, I felt like you've really explained more about these issues that has to do with the missing link, because we have many policies. We should make this policy to work through implementation structures to make this work. And you also mentioned something that's not involving them. I am an agricultural economist, and part of what we do is that when we want to involve farmers or land owners in any policy making, they have to be part of it. If they are not part of it, they won't participate. They will become laggards. Yes. They will not understand. They will not want to buy to what you are doing or what the initiative you are bringing, because they are not part of it. So you have said more than enough, like much knowledge on what could be the missing link in women's land rights. And I totally agree with it on you, that all of this thing defines women's land rights. Because, we keep building up policies upon policies where the implementation land? Where are the structures to make this happen? Why do we still have women, taking a backseat when it comes to land ownership? Why do they have to be stripped of their rights because of they lost their husband, so they don't have the rights to own a land? So it's really, really a bad thing that we need to talk about, that we need to improve, or that we need to look beyond. And I really appreciate what the International Land Coalition is doing on all of this issue. And my second question is that, how do we protect democracy through women's land rights? Democracy, we could see that there's a direct or an indirect connection between democracy, land, and women's rights, because when there are environmental instability, it totally affects women's rights. Definitely women bears the brunt of this crisis, and invariably democracy in such region could be fragile. So how do we protect democracy through women's land rights, or through improving women's rights?
Yeah, I will actually try and respond to you using Africa, which is a continent that I belong to, and the continent that I have more experience in. So if you think about the 2063 agenda of the African Union, it enshrines its first principles as a thriving continent for and by the people of Africa. It talks about all natural resources in Africa belong, and they are for use and to advance the welfare of the people of Africa and the future generation of Africans. So why is it that when it comes to utilization of the natural resources of Africa, and particularly land, we are giving more cognizant resource access and control to more global companies that come to exploit resources at against the will and not to the benefit of our people. And I think that's where democracy for me should start, that we already have an African leadership that has a blueprint that has identified that what we have is for the people and should be utilized by the people for the welfare of the people of Africa. So we need to be cognizant of what we have assigned into. The second thing, we are also party to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it talks about leave no one behind. It is the biggest principle and the most profound principle that is actually grounds the Sustainable Development Goal. That's why most of the African continent governments, and I would say most governments around the world that comes from developing countries, signed into it because they realized that we are not going to leave anyone behind. And so when we are leaving the voices of the indigenous people, of the local women, of the rural women, of the pastoralists, what are we doing? We are not sincere to democratizing through action the kind of blueprints that look so democratic. And I think that's the problem. And so we also need to be able, democracy is about, for me, when I went to school, I was told is when decisions are made by the people, with the people, for the people. So by the people, we are talking about women who have survived through big disasters. So they already know what works to make a community to be resilient to disasters. So why don't we start building on the solutions that women themselves have found? That even when the governments, the states are collapsing, when civil society do not have funding and cannot continue working, when donors are changing their way of work and they're shifting where their investment will go, that these women continue to be resilient in the local level. meaning there is something that they are doing that we don't do, and we are not willing to build on it. We really need to put money there so that these women can scale out and scale up these solutions so that we can have a thriving and sustainable development all over the world.
Yeah,
You know
thank
what?
you.
Whenever we talk about financing communities, you will hear microfinancing. So if we want to support agriculture that is actually climate resilient, we'll say, oh, let's start microfinancing for women so that they can. Why is it when we talk about women, it's about microfinancing? Let's finance women to invest in solutions that work so that we are not thinking about micro, because their solutions are not micro. Their solutions are big and have global impacts.
Yeah, totally agree with you. When women have rights to own a land, it becomes a solution multiplier. Like they could gain access to loan, to other resources that they could use to improve their land. They could plant trees as windbreakers. They could do a lot of innovativeness to see that they are being creative towards productivity, towards tackling food insecurity, hunger, poverty, and the rest. And I think the world needs to invest more in women. Microfinance shouldn't be for a thought for women to be financed. We need higher funding, we need greater funding, we need different access to see that we scale up. And also looking at the time constraint that women have to go through to get water, to try to stabilize their family, trekking distance, kilometer, and all of these time constraints really matters towards women's rights, for them to be able to channel those time for economic gain, for productivity, for innovativeness. And I know that indigenous and local women, they have this innovation. What they need is access to resources that they can use to get this thing done. Everyone have a solution to bring on board when it comes to tackling the defining issue of our time. So no one should be left behind. So I totally understand and agree with what you have all just said, because I mean, women's land really matters in solving the defining issue of our time. And this leads me to the next question on what do you think are the solution multipliers and risk minimizer when women are given the access to own a land? Could you just outline all of those factors that we could benefit and the risk minimizer? Just like in the sub-Saharan Africa, we have women producing 60 to 80% of our food production. I mean, if they are now given the total access to own a land, they could multiply productivity. They could help to solve a lot of critical issues that we are facing in our community. And it could also help to end child brides and the rest. So I really want to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have almost said what I would want to say, because any woman and any individual, if I know I have 3 years to use land because I don't know whether an extractive industry is going to uproot me out of this community, or the government will take my land for other kind of infrastructure and leave me landless, or I do not know whether the family of my husband will actually take it away from me in the 3 years, I am not going to invest in its sustainability. So I'll exploit it knowing I am here for a short time. And that is normal. So if we are saying that we have 80% of women who are producing food in Africa for the African people, yet less than 2% of them secure land, what are we saying? Even as they produce this land, they are producing this land with a lot of insecurity in their minds, in the way they do the business. They are not paid enough. They cannot produce enough. They cannot even make decisions on what goes to the market. They cannot make decisions. Sometimes they even know they're the ones who go to the market. They know what produces can actually sell at much higher prime prices than men. But because they cannot make decision on which kind of crops they have to negotiate and it takes time, they cannot make those quick decisions to use it. They know, as we unfortunately suffer from the climate change, we also must be able to adapt. They know what are the adaptation mechanisms and strategies. And you need to do this quickly because climate change is not waiting for us. But because they don't have the security of land, they cannot do things that will make us resilient from climate change over a long time. And that is bad. These women cannot bequeath this land to their own children. So when you talk to a girl child, she almost know in normal circumstances, she will not own land. So she is not inspired even to understand what are the do's and don'ts to make the land more productive and more sustainable, because she doesn't have hope that she will own land, because she knows in the line of our family, the land is given to men and not the male figures, and it's not the female figures. And this is really bad. And land is not really just about this production. I would say that land is a human right for everyone. We must secure land so that everybody can have it. It is our heritage. It's our heritage for all of us. It gives us orientation. Because if I don't know where I belong, because for Africa in particular, the piece of land where your house is located, where your home is located, that is where your heritage is. Now, if you can't even tell whether I belong to this community or that community, we are destroying women's orientation to their heritage. And I think this is injustice and it's unacceptable. And we really need to do more. The International Land Coalition recently did a big report on uneven ground and showing how land inequality is actually expanding. And you know what? This research showed that over 60% of the land that we have in the natural resources, it is actually being protected, and with all the ecosystems and the all biodiversity we have it today because it is being sustained by the indigenous people, particularly women. But you know what? Less than 10% of all the land that is globally available, it's owned by indigenous people. And even if you go closer to that statistic, less than 1% that women own, even in the indigenous community. So it also tells you how much unpaid labor that women are doing, because then we are protecting the biodiversity, we are protecting the ecosystem, we are paid, and other people are thriving and they are utilizing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. I know you could go on and on to explain all of these issues, but then, you've mentioned quite a number of points, that we need to redefine land. Land is a human right, not just for one particular people. It should be a joint thing that we own to see how we can try to improve on it, because I know that women are custodians of land, because they have a very close relationship with their environment. And over time, I feel that there's a form of colonialism that deprived women of their rights through bringing in technology that are male dominated just to enroll women of those rights. Because Africans were faced with colonialism, and that alone took away several of our cultures that were there, try to replace it with theirs. And so there's a need for us to redefine land, to retrace our paths on what we need to do to stabilize our society in bringing up solutions together. And so just briefly, just before we conclude this, briefly just tell us what are the solutions that could influence women's empowerment? I know you have mentioned a lot, but just briefly tell us, just within a minute, and then we could move to the concluding phase of it.
Yeah. So briefly, and if I repeat, please forgive me, because some things are so important. We must be able to put women at the center and at the driver's seat of the solutions that we all need. We know the solutions. Researches have been done. In those solutions, we need to be cognizant and be crystal clear that before we make any step, that women are at the center and at the driver's seat. That we need to invest on the solutions that are led by women. It's not just putting them on the driver's seats and expect them to do and carry on with unpaid labor. We need to put adequate resources in their hands so that, one, they can even buy land. They can make use better of the land that they have, but they can also be able to negotiate at the customary level, for example, their equitable control and use and maintenance of this land. And I think at this point, let me say this, we have a global opportunity. We have the Generation Equality Forum that has come with commitments, and everybody understands that if we want to deal with gender equality and we want to empower women and fulfill all the promises made by women, we have commitments that have been written out. Generation equality is profound. As international coalition, together with partners like Oxfam International, LADESA, the Mwaura Commission, the GLTN, UN Habitat, and many other organizations, we brought forth a collective commitment on women's land rights. It's written what we need to do. And we are saying, if we have to fulfill the aspiration of the generation or of the 2030 agenda, using the opportunity given to us by the generation equality action plans and the commitment, first and foremost, we must make sure that any of the implementation secures and make sure we do not lose any gain that we have made so far to secure women's land rights. Secondly, that any investment, any action plan must make sure that it's advancing, whether it's climate change commitment, whether it's violence against women commitments in the generation equality, whether it's using data and using technology, whether it's movement building, whether it's economic justice, all this must advance secure women's land rights as a precondition for closing the gender equality gap and advancing women's human rights and achieving sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very beautiful response, I must say, because I saw a report that says that it's going to take 135 years for us to close the gap. And then I was wondering that if it could take 135 years for us to close the gender gap, then it means that it's going to take more than a century for us to be able to achieve climate justice. And it might be more than that because the pandemic has further deepened inequality. You know, it led to gender-based violence and the rest. So I think my next question for the concluding part of this beautiful, interesting, interactive interview would be what the International Land Coalition are doing when it comes to land rights for women, for everyone. I know you've mentioned quite a number of them, but then, you know, during the pandemic, there was increase in gender-based violence, you know, different areas because women were holding fragile livelihoods that were lost at the cost of the pandemic, and different things that happened, you know, because they need to trek distance. So they were sexually abused, you know, the girls have to trek, have to walk have to do a lot of things. At some point, they became dropout. They couldn't resume school after the pandemic, affecting girls' child education and the rest. So just tell us the activities that ILC is doing on all of these issues. Then we conclude it that way. Just 1 minute. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to say, during the pandemic, one of the decisions the International LiQWYD Coalition did is that when everybody went to using technology for conversation, the International LiQWYD Coalition made investment to ensure that members, particularly women's-led organizations in the International LiQWYD Coalition, had a voice by making sure they had access to technology, that they were in the rooms when online meetings were happening, and they could tell the stories that you have just described. And so they could surface what was happening. So, and has developed a tool called LADEX that is very good for communities, community-friendly, it's women-friendly, so that women can continuously track their situation and are able to collect evidence using this tool, because data is everything, is important. And it's best to have data collected, used, stored by women for their own advancement, but also for advocacy. And so that's one. The third thing is this link between secure women's land rights and climate change. So two things that the current strategic plan of the International Women's LiQWYD, the International LiQWYD Coalition has anchored. It is the priority is women, land rights, and climate change. And lastly, we are very, very active in the global process. In the UNFCCC, we were there pushing for women's land rights. We are going to be very visible at the CSW 65 that is happening in the coming month, March. We have high-level session. We are working with the European Union, with the Switzerland government, with the Netherlands government, with the FAO, with IFAD, with UN agencies, just to and grassroots women, just to profile this work. And more important, we are soon going to be holding a very huge regional event on the 8th of March. It's going to be in Nairobi, and we're going to be raising the issue of secure women's land rights in relation to the climate change and the nexus of the sustainable development. And again, we are launching the Stand for Halal campaign that day on the 8th of March. And I said the Stand for Halal campaign is aimed to make sure that we are bridging the policies between the gap between the policies and implementation to ensure that we accelerate secure women's land rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is it. Very wonderful work that you are all doing to see that we try to step up effort towards women's rights in any way, in technology, in power, environment, infrastructure, and the rest across all sectors. And I think that is one thing that the Elite Climate Action started. That was last year through the funding of United Nations Development, in Nigeria funds to see that. And one of those things we used it for is we gave women access to organic fertilizer that they could use in their various farms. And in the process, we could ask them, did you people own a land? One of those things we asked of them was land ownership. And majority of them, in fact, just only one person that could say that she owned a land, out of many people that were all there. So it shows the big inequality when it comes to land rights. So how do we fight the climate change crisis when we don't have equal land rights to fight it? It shouldn't be male dominated. It should be both dominated when we are trying to fight the defining issue of our time. We have to see that both gender benefit from it. and we all try to tackle it from both ends, not just from one end. It needs us to tackle it from both ends. So I really understand or relate with all what you have said, and I've seen the beautiful work your organization is doing, and I'm really looking forward to different areas that you people will be talking about, be launching, International Women's Day and beyond. And I really appreciate your presence, honoring this interview with me. And I feel my audience will be really empowered with this information to see how we can use women's land rights as a solution multiplier and as a risk minimizer in trying to tackle the defining issue of our time. So thank you once again for coming. My name is Oladosu Adenike, an ecofeminist and a climate justice activist, and also an eco reporter, the founder of I Lead Climate Action.
Thank you very much. My honor and a pleasure to have been with you in this show, and let it continue. Let it be strong. Keep the fire going. Thank you very much.
Thank you.